you know, you've talked about the times being tough. Were times ever tough for your family, like later on when, after, I mean, of course you were raised during the Depression.
Yes, how well I remember.
Yeah. And that was when there was a lot of bartering?
A lot of bartering and a lot of having to leave your house to earn a little bit of money for necessities like shoes. And my mother was a seamstress. She could sew anything for us. Turn an old coat around and make us a coat. That kind of thing. So we were lucky that way. But I remember that my dad would buy a whole roll of the same cloth. So Victor would get shirts made that looked just like, I mean, our dresses were so and skirts and vests and things. They were all the same pattern and the same. But my mother, I don't know, I think she did try to vary some of it, but times were so hard, you didn't have much choice. And I remember that another thing, she could use a shoe frame, an iron shoe frame, and even cut shoes and fold them in, and just, she had the whole kit, you know, for repairing shoes. And an expert she was at that, until Victor would say, well, eventually she can't repair them anymore, so they'll have to buy me a pair of shoes.
Was Victor the oldest?
My brother, no, he's a year younger than I am.
Were you the
but
oldest?
He's a real character. He blames everything that happened on me.
Yeah.
To this day he does.
Yeah.
Even about the prayer sessions. He'd say that it was my fault that the prayer sessions were so long because I moved so much and coughed so much that my grandma would just prolong the prayers. It's mean.
A while ago or earlier when we were having dinner or lunch, you were talking about that your dad would work for the railroad and then your mom would can and then you would load up and you would move to wherever you would you like to elaborate on that?
When harvest time came around on the farm and everything was harvested and my mom had saved dried fruit and dried chili and dried corn for tortillas and everything and she'd even grind that blue corn to have it like a meal and then later make it into blue corn tortillas or porridge or hominy or pozole, whatever. And I remember when we had done all that, she would load this pickup that we had with a long trailer thing that my dad had built on his own, and she'd load everything and we'd go either to Las Palomas because he was working with the Lyons brothers at that time on the highway, or if he was working in Magdalena with a Forest Service, we'd go to Magdalena. Or if he was working in TRC, we'd come to TRC. When he was working with the Forest Service, we really loved it because most of the time we could stay at the farm, and he would come to see us.
That was in Monticello.
In Monticello, but when he worked with the highway, we never knew where we were going. Sometimes we'd come to Las Palomas, to Las Animas, to San Miguel, because that's when they were really doing what we call the pavement now on the roads, I think. And this too was closed like to 1933, 1932, 1933.
Did they 34. Use prisoners from
during the war? They did use prisoners in this valley. And my neighbor that used to live there that died told me that she was a retired school teacher, and peculiar, people would say, just like they think I'm peculiar. She and I became real good friends. And she said the prisoners would come to pick cotton, work all day long, and they would only give them a little bit of water all day. So guess what she would do? She'd fill a little barrel of water and just cart it, and they said, you're not supposed to talk to the prisoners. And she'd say, no, I'm not going to talk to the prisoners. I'm just going to leave them some fresh water.
Now, were these
Her
prisoners?
name was Ulalia, German.
These were prisoners from the German concentration camp.
From the German.
That was in Deming.
Because she would tell me they all spoke German. And at one time she was coming out of prayer meeting at the church, the old church in Garfield, and the whole platoon was walking with their guards, and she stopped and waved to them like this, and the guards stopped, and she said, shouldn't they come in the church at least once? And they let them go in the church. And she said, I never saw such a reverent group. She said, they must have been Catholics. And my dad would shake his head like that. Oh, they were Catholics.
And what was her name again?
Ulalia. Her name was Ulalia Odorisi. She had an Italian name. And she had been a teacher in her young days with this valley.
In the valley.
Very interesting.
What was the name? What was the name of the church here?
San Isidro.
San Isidro.
It's still the name. San Isidro. San Isidro the farmer. No, in Array it's St. Joseph Mission. St. Joseph Mission.
What do you remember? You've talked earlier about your houses that were up in Canada Alamosa. What they were you kind of describe them in your memory? You know, what did they look like?
They were adobe houses, all built on the same pattern. They usually were just a big square and then a big hall through the middle, and all of the doors from the bedrooms, kitchen included, running into this long hall. And then the hall had a main door out. And I think they were built that way, very narrow windows, because of the Indians in the old days, you know. Yet supposedly they were friends with the Indians. I don't understand this, the irony.
The houses along the plaza, where all the doors were opening to the plaza.
To the plaza.
That was also...
That was a custom. And they had walls all surrounding the plaza. After this last flood, then we lost the last of those walls, but they were pretty evident before then.
When was that last flood?
In when Dr. Maloney died.
1969.
About that.
Yeah. Okay, so that was when they took the last of the walls out that protected the plaza.
That protected the plaza. And now you may see vestiges like towards where the old post office used to be, and where Moses Sanchez and the Montoyas used to live. There may be evidence, you know, on the side of these rock and adobe walls, but they were all the ones that were towards the town, the village, were destroyed, which was kind of sad because there was something to. They didn't need them anymore, but they were there.
Did you have to? Childhood diseases. You were born in 1923. What do you remember about them? I think at one time you told me about Simona and you had measles together, or was it chickenpox?
Yeah, we had measles and chickenpox together. I remember that they brought them into. We lived in a little tiny house in TRC against the hill right there by the mid-school. In later years we continued to live there, but the houses became better, you know, and larger. And I remember that they brought them with real swollen glands, and later they had to have their tonsils out as a result. And so Flavio and Simona said something about, their parents said something about they couldn't eat chili, and Flavio and Simona said, oh yes, we can. And they went bravely eating chili, and I remember that I couldn't eat a drop of chili, but here they could. And next day they were well, not even a trace of the tonsillectomy, whatever. And here I was so sick, and I almost envied them. And then in later years, they would still come back to TRC, clear from Winston or Chloride, to take care of their kids, you know, because their doctors couldn't go. They couldn't go to Monticello either, unless it was a real emergency. And you had to meet them halfway if the arroyo was running. But
what do you remember about TRC? You know, when you left Monticello and then you went to Las Palomas and San Miguel, did you live as a child in TRC?
Yes.
What years were that?
Well, when I was like in 4th grade, I attended 4th grade with Miss Stanfield, whose name is still around a lot. And then later Mr. Stewart was in the middle school. At that time they didn't call it a mid-school, but we had the middle grades to themselves. And he was actually the principal of the high school, but he would also oversee us in mid-school, and he would always sponsor a summer school. And I remember that my dad would let me go to summer school. It cost $5. I guess it must have seemed a lot of money to him, but now it doesn't seem a lot of money to me. But I always did get the $5, and I would go to Mr. Stewart and register. And he'd say, Vidal, someday you'll be very glad to be doing this. And you know what? He liked to teach math. He was just a super duper math teacher. So I always remember. Then later he was my teacher in high school. And so was Miss Giles and Miss Warren and Mrs. Frederick. And
what year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in Monticello because I had gone to these summer schools. I ended up gathering enough quarters so that I graduated from high school in 3 years, and I graduated in Monticello because we had gone back to do the spring planting. But I had had all my courses in TRC, and I was taking geometry at a time, and Mr. Farmer said, well, we're not offering geometry, but I'll help you finish out. And he did, so that I could, finish my senior year. And
what year was that?
What else did I take? Just when the war began, Sherry. It was real dreadful, 1942.